Hello, everyone, and welcome to the PLAR podcast, where we explore all facets of prior learning assessment and recognition. I am your host, Natalie DeVoe.
And I'm your co-host, Andrew Skapenko, and we're excited to introduce the guests of this episode.
Our first guest is Patrick Reinartz. He is the Recognition of Prior Learning Coordinator, New Brunswick Community College, NBCC. Patrick serves as coordinator for NBCC's Prior Learning Assessment and Recognition PLAR pilot. In this role, he contributes to systems and process development aspects of the project, while also providing service, documentation, and support for participants. Patrick has a decade-long background in corporate training, where he acted as LMS administrator and technical support for a leading US-based health services provider.
Michelle Chisholm, learning and design consultant for prior learning at the New Brunswick Community College. Her role in NBCC's prior learning assessment and recognition pilot project was to work collaboratively with internal subject matter experts and a larger PLAR team to help establish better practices related to the recognition of prior learning. She brings a knowledge of evidence-based strategies in assessment, universal design for learning, and other inclusionary or accessible practices to the project that aims to diminish barriers to incoming and current students of NBCC. Michelle's background is in education, having previously worked as a teacher for PETL New Brunswick and for St. Thomas University. Michelle has a Master of Education in Exceptional Learners from the University of New Brunswick, along with a Bachelor of Arts and Bachelor of Education from St. Thomas University. Welcome to this episode, Michelle and Patrick.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Before we dive into the details about the IT pilot project, can you tell us how it came to existence?
Yeah, absolutely. I can field that one. If we have to kind of rewind a couple of years at least. But essentially, we heard about at NBCC about a project coming down the line in the Atlantic provinces called the College Transformation des Collèges project, which was led by Atlantic Colleges, Collège Atlantique, the ACA, as we'll refer to them more informally. And they had this project, which was funded again in turn by Future Skills Centre Canada. And we're reaching out to the colleges on our end of the country about trying to come up with a set of related projects with some shared values. And those, you kind of mentioned this in the introduction already, but a large part of the group's projects were all revolving around reducing barriers essentially to education for equity deserving groups in one way or another, and finding alternate pathways to education. So we fell into one of those 7 projects, and the timing could not really have been better because PLAR is a pretty significant topic of interest at the college and something that's always been at the forefront of something we want to explore further. So that was a pretty natural fit when that funding came along that we decided to launch this pilot, and that's where Michelle and I came into the picture as well. The other little piece there, I guess, is that we did this pilot in IT, the information technology sector, and that came about fairly straightforward just from market research in terms of there being a significant demand for positions. So we thought, well, if we can do it with that field, then we can sort of do it anywhere. So we just decided to focus in on one area for now to get things started. And the rest is pretty much history from there. We pretty much hit the ground running in terms of trying to design this pilot.
Perfect. Can you continue to describe the project, the scope, funding you touched on, duration of the pilot of the project, and which credentials participated in it primarily?
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of duration, we, like Patrick mentioned, this has to go back a few years. Patrick came on board at NBCC in late 2020, and I came on early 2021. And we've been working on this pilot project in terms of research and development since then. But if you're speaking in relation to intake and intake of participants, that only began in November 2021. So it took us a bit of work up front to be able to be up and running. And Patrick actually closed up our project in summer 2022. So the intake of participants and their work was between November 2021 and summer 2022. And how it looks is a little bit different than what other colleges or other institutions may be offering. What we did for the pilot project we took a perspective of trying to offer different services at NBCC. If you're not familiar, we already have an RPL office at NBCC that offers RPL services to current students. So one of our guiding principles for this pilot project was to look at offering PLAR as a service to incoming students, to potential NBCC students, kind of an upfront assessment before they even start their courses within their programs. And because of that, we built the program to be course by course. So our participants were evaluated on their prior learning to be directly translated into credit equivalencies. And another piece that was different about our pilot project was that we were looking at continuous intake, and how our RPL office structures services for current students is deadline based. So they have to apply by a certain point, and they receive their answer at a certain point. What we tried to do was allow for intake of participants during that timeframe that I mentioned before, that November to the summer. And that way participants all started at different times, but it could be better fit to their schedule. Definitely a little bit more work on Patrick and I's part, but we were able to look at how that might benefit the student in terms of barriers and those types of things. So what we ended up looking at is their informal education, their experiential learning, and we looked at evaluating that for credit equivalencies. And like Patrick mentioned previously, we did focus on the IT sector. So those courses that I mentioned, they were all within the programmer analyst and web and mobile application development programs at NBCC.
We were wondering what was the process for prospective students to participate in the pilot. Is there anything else you'd like to add to what you already covered for the timeline and the overview? In the first episode, we heard a lot of good feedback about the IT department at NBCC and how they set up the electronic system for working with the PLAR candidates. Was that the same system that was used for the IT pilot project prospects?
I can run you right through the whole thing from top to bottom, actually. Maybe that would answer it well. Yeah, absolutely. So the development we did before November, that was all basically in preparation for the participants who would come along then. We already had a number who'd been contacting us over the summer, even so they were sort of ready to go by the time we launched. Anyone who did contact us, and as Michelle mentioned, this was open to anyone with really any applicable prior learning. They didn't have to be current students. So if anyone felt they had that prior learning, they could contact us. And the first thing we would do is essentially just give them a sort of a screening information form so that we could learn about them, who they are, what kind of background they're coming from, what their work history looks like and their education history. Since we're specifically working on IT, we also wanted to know what kind of tools and software they were already familiar with, what languages they were already familiar with. Because that would all help us inform a sort of a picture of who this person was, which is obviously a big part of something we need to know about a participant for PLAR. Based on the information we got there, which included also sort of areas of interest for the student. So if they knew that they were particularly strong in, let's say database development with SQL, they would let us know in that form. And we had all of the different courses that were available, essentially selectable as an option. Using that information, we would issue out a series of self-assessments for all of the participants. And again, this was fairly important to us that we had a lot of this sort of upfront information collection, just to help us really identify ideal candidates for both for the pilot and also to make sure that we didn't put people through all of this work without a strong chance of success. We were very focused on the participant success for this. So the self-assessments included a rubric and competencies from the courses they selected in the previous form. So they could essentially look at their learning from the same perspective that the assessors would be looking at it later once they demonstrated their prior learning. So they could, for let's say, if they were doing intro to programming, they could actually see all of the different skills required of that course and give themselves a score for each one to see how they would fit into the course's requirements. That information is super helpful, not just for us, as it turns out, but also for the student, because they then know what to actually expect from the course and what it is they're going to be expected to show. And we, in turn, learn a lot about their confidence level in all of those skill areas. that sort of left us with enough information at this point to decide, who we thought was an appropriate candidate for PLAR, someone who had prior learning to show, essentially, that would actually be the equivalent of a course, versus someone who either didn't quite have the learning yet and needed to do a little more study, or someone who was sort of on the cusp and could be a participant. And we did give those people the option to participate as well if they wanted. Just keeping in mind that, if the assessors thought any lower of their skills than they themselves did, there was always that little risk there. And we know with PLAR that that's sort of an ongoing concern, is that we don't, we want to set people up for success. We don't want people to go through a big process and be disappointed in the results either. If they came through all that and they decided, yes, this is for me, I feel strongly about my skills, I'm ready to show them, we would pass along to them a formal registration form and an appendix, which would essentially bring them officially into the NBCC systems. This was how we would be able to give them system access to Brightspace, which is ultimately where they would be doing all of their demonstrations. And they would have a student number and all of those goodies as well. Once they're in the system, we basically showered them with documentation and information.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Basically, just they get handbooks, they get lots of follow-up emails, just explaining what it is that they need to do now. Because as we explained last time around as well, this is a largely sort of independent project for a learner. We're there to give guidance and to provide answers and make sure they know what they need to do. But the work happens on the student side, and that's something we also really needed to stress at this point. Once they were in Brightspace, they had access to their courses, one per equivalency that they were seeking. Each one was divided into modules based on the number of competencies in the course, so that they could speak to each competency individually and not necessarily get distracted by the other materials in the course.
Right.
Which is also great for our assessors, as it turns out, because again, they know exactly what they're looking at with each piece of material. They don't have to themselves map pieces of documentation to competencies. The students already kind of done that for them, was the thinking. Another big piece of that is, of course, that since we were using Brightspace, we were able to use the built-in rubrics even and provide them ahead of time with all of the criteria that they would be using to do the assessments. So from the instructor side, all they really had to do was read the materials and assign values. Fairly straightforward. I know I'm talking a lot here, but there's a lot that happens. So.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question, but I wonder if it might be answered later. It's about which courses did you see were taken advantage of much more than others? Which
That's a great
courses?
question.
Yeah.
That's a great question. We do have that. So let me come back around to that one.
Okay.
So once they've requested assessment, we had our assessors work through it and they were able to give feedback. One thing we learned early on was that, when we initially envisioned this, we thought, well, the student will do all of their work. Once they have it all together in a nice clean package, then we'll pass it off to the assessors to work on it.
Right.
What we discovered in practice was that the assessors were actually very encouraging of the notion of having people just do one competency first, as sort of a test competency, let's say.
Right.
That had benefits both for the assessor and for the student, it turns out, because the student would then be able to get the sort of guidance that they needed to complete the rest of their work and know that they're on the right track. And for the assessor, it means that, again, they're able to curb any sort of unwanted approaches or behaviors in what they're supplying before it becomes an issue.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, I can really see the value of that. But I can also see that you might not think that that's the way to do it ahead of time. I mean, now if I'm ever in a position where I get to set up a program like this, I'll get to benefit from your experience, right? And I'll know that that's a great way to go. But that's wonderful that you identified that. Sounds like pretty early on.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of learning, as I'm sure you can imagine, that happened along the way. I mean, just the other thing we realized is that the PLAR also needs to be somewhat at least customized based on the school you're addressing and the subject matter you're addressing. Like in IT, for example, we realized we really needed to know more about the tools and the software languages that the participants were familiar with going in, because those aren't necessarily always specified in the competencies, and yet we know they need to meet certain prerequisites for future courses in the program.
Yeah.
So again, something we learned along the way is that we need to establish upfront, what programming languages are you working in, making sure that it's actually appropriate for the program they're going into.
Patrick, can I add something to that?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's also interesting because our perspective is from the IT realm. But if you think about PLAR, if you were running a pilot project in any other kind of department or career-based, you would still have to make those precautions ahead of time. So if you were doing carpentry, or if you were doing a trade, or any other career, you would still have to think up front that your participants have access to the tools that they need, and they also have the specific skills that they need to be able to demonstrate their learning, in terms of, especially for us, that it was equivalent to credit equivalencies, right? So it has to be applicable to the college as well. So you almost have to do that kind of pre-screener process to make sure that your participants are aware of what tools and skills are expected of them if you want to ensure their success in the process.
Yeah, definitely. And the range of tools.
Mm-hmm.
And do they have to show competency with all of them, or is it a subset, at least 3 of these tools?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it really depends on the course largely as well. But
exactly.
Yeah.
So essentially, once they have their feedback, though, from the assessors, there's an opportunity always still for we at least during the pilot, as much as possible, gave the participants a chance to react to feedback. So if an assessor told them this is good, but you need to show me a little bit more of X or Y, then we gave them the chance to add that information to their file if they wanted to. Whereas if they felt, I've shown you everything I have, then maybe that's the end of the assessment piece right there.
Yeah.
But in those cases where we had successful assessments, that then resulted in us providing those credits to the RPL office, who applied them formally to the transcript for the student. Meaning they can now access an official transcript if they wanted, an informal one that they can access through their student accounts, just like any other student, really.
And they can also apply for an official one too through the registrar's office.
All right. So next we wanted to ask you about stakeholders. Were there any industry partners involved?
There were. And when Patrick and I were thinking about this previous to us recording right now, we realized our list of stakeholders is quite extensive inside the college and outside of the college. The idea was that we wanted really to be open to working with both, of course, NBCC in general and different departments in general, but also looking at outside and our external subject matter experts, people that really knew the realm of IT, to be able to help give us feedback on the processes and on the curricular piece of our PLAR pilot. But who we ended up kind of working with, to be more specific, is internally, this pilot project touched a lot of different departments at NBCC and really made apparent some of the kind of barriers that may exist at NBCC to new ideas, new programs. And what ended up happening was that this became so tied to other pilot projects going on at NBCC, changes that have been advocated for at the college across departments for helping better the student experience. So we ended up working with the RPL office. I know that you met Mackenzie the last episode that Patrick participated in.
Right.
We worked with her very closely because we wanted to make sure that our pilot project was adding to our services at NBCC in regards to PLAR, and not creating more barriers for change. And in order to do that, the RPL office already offers great services to our current students. So what could we do to expand on that rather than completely change it, or rather than to continue to do the same thing that they're already offering? So we worked very closely with them. We worked with admissions, of course, because this is a different pathway into the college through PLAR, because we were working with potential students rather than current students. We worked very closely with recruitment because they helped us access wait lists, at the college of people that might be interested in the two particular programs that we were doing the IT pilot project in. They also helped us reach out doing webinars to potential students and just really supported us in the initiative and tried to encourage people that they had spoken to directly to come if it was applicable to them to apply to our pilot project. I worked a lot with the curricular development team. And that was because the front end part of this pilot took a lot of curricular mapping, and it took a lot of building out the competencies that already exist at NBCC to be better fit for PLAR. So I ended up working a lot with the development team to make sure that for quality assurance that we were accurate to what the courses are offering, what the courses that we offer at NBCC, but additionally accurate to what is shown in the classes or what is taught in the classes, and also what can be demonstrated by our participants, because there's a big difference between a broad course competency and a skill, like a very specific skill. So we had to try to make those a lot more specific. I think you all mentioned previously that Patrick in the last episode kind of talked about the IT piece. We did work extensively with the IT department because we were using things like Brightspace and our student information management system. So we really had to work collectively with them to make sure that what we were building was also aligned with our pre-existing systems. We also worked extensively, both Patrick and I, with our internal subject matter experts, and who they were our instructors. They were actually our instructors for the programmer analyst and web and mobile application development programs. And they helped me with the curricular development, the assessment piece, the rubrics. We worked collectively to create those lists of skills and competencies. And then once the project was launched, they were our assessors. So they helped build the project on what we were assessing the participants on. But then they also were the ones using those rubrics and using all of the things that we developed to assess the participants' prior learning.
That's great. So you didn't have to get another group of people familiar with the
no.
rubrics,
And what also helped with it too was that they bought in, because really they helped build this thing. So of course they wanted to see the success of it. And it was reflected of the courses that they teach. So if these participants decided to go to NBCC afterwards, these were going to be the students that they were going to see in their courses. So of course they want to see their success, and they want to make sure that what they are assessed for is going to help them and create building blocks for their upper year courses that they would take at NBCC. And one last group that I think is really important to mention that we worked with is our external subject matter experts. We worked with 3 companies locally here in New Brunswick. Hotspot Parking is one of them, Troje and Remsoft. And the 3 of them we used as more of we looked to them for advice and collaboration when we were building in the front end. So when Patrick and I kind of had finalized the lists of core competencies and we had an idea of what the process would look like for applicants or participants, we had one-on-one sessions with employees from those organizations to help us review the competencies to see if they were reflective of what was needed of someone working in that field. And then also if they could see the value of PLAR, could they see how this pilot project could be helpful to fill in vacancies that they have at their work? Could they see how this process could be just beneficial in general to them and to their future employees?
So again, it sounds like those conversations would help with buy-in. I imagine when it comes time to hire people that have gone through the process.
Agreed. And it also kind of built a foundation for the potential for future projects. And there was a lot of talk ahead of time, like, what could we do to better our relationships with our external subject matter experts. And if we were to continue to grow and try different areas of PLAR, there are opportunities there that maybe we have, more of a segue between our participants' participation in PLAR and their work at NBCC. And then maybe there's some sort of partnership where there could be employment at any of these potential places, or maybe some of the workers that are currently involved or currently employed at these organizations might want to look for formal certification. So they could, maybe that partnership could allow for an opportunity where their current employees would PLAR through NBCC for some sort of formal certification, because they're already working in the field and they obviously have the work experience. But that's obviously not what this PLAR project was, this pilot project, but it created a foundation for a potential to do those kinds of things in the future.
Can you tell us about the project goals and to which extent they have been achieved?
Michelle kind of touched on it earlier there. We have a great RPL office at the college with an awesome team. Our goal with the pilot was to learn primarily, specifically about how we could enhance or expand the services that we already have. There's a lot of sort of qualitative learning involved in there. We wanted to know about how PLAR really benefits students. What do they really get out of it? We wanted to know more about, fee structures and providing a sustainable service and what that really looks like. We wanted to know about the student experience of engaging in PLAR. What kind of concerns do they have going into PLAR or afterwards? How can we really make sure that they're getting what they need from it and that it's a beneficial service for them? We also want to know about our systems limitations at the college. Michelle touched on this as well. We did a lot of poking and prodding at our systems to see what would hold and what wouldn't. And we definitely learned through that process as well. And really the pilot is the answer to the question of, well, how do we learn all of those things? And the answer is, I think, by doing them. Even though the pilot was on a fairly small scale with a handful of participants, our goal was to just let's put a few people through these paces and develop all of these systems that we would need to do it and provide all of the software we need to do it, and then see how well it works, how it doesn't work, where can we improve, and how can we use this information to improve and expand the services we already have. And I would say we accomplished that to a significant extent, in the sense that we're still talking about everything we've learned. We're still having daily conversations with members of other teams, kind of sharing what came out of it. And there's a lot of surprising conversations that come up, especially from the sort of the systems and the student experience side, in terms of how people experience PLAR on the other side of the coin.
Can you give an example of one thing that was surprising?
Ooh, Michelle, can you think of one specific thing that jumps out off the top of your head?
Well, if we're talking and speak of systems, one of the big questions we had ahead of time was, how do we get these participants into Brightspace? And the reason, to give you background on why that was an issue, was that in order to be enrolled into Brightspace courses at NBCC, you have to have a student account. So you have to be in the student information system. And why is that an issue? Well, as it exists at NBCC, the only people that are issued those accounts are current students. Because our PLAR participants were in the potential student realm, we had to create a workaround to issue them a student account so that they could be put into Brightspace, so that they could receive a transcript. All of the parts of the pilot project that we wanted to include, they essentially had to have a student number and be in the student system. So what that did is it was already a pre-existing conversation happening at the college, but what it did was kind of enforce the idea that there should be levels to our student accounts. And other institutions already practice this, and it's been kind of a question at NBCC, like, how do we introduce this? What does it look like? And I think our PLAR pilot kind of gave insight into the fact that if we really do want to offer services expanded across the province and across the country, across the world, we really have to be open to the opportunity of having leveled accounts. For example, like we'd have that potential student account, we could have the current student account, and we could have the alumni student account. So that way, wherever you are on your journey with NBCC, you could still have access to some of our services. You would already have that existing account. And in relation to us and the PLAR pilot, that can really encourage a student to continue to study at NBCC, although it wasn't a prerequisite to participating in the PLAR pilot. Because you're already enrolled, because you already have a student account, you already have a transcript, you have access to information, and you already have made connections at the college. In terms of recruitment, it's great, because you might have the push, or you might have the higher interest of becoming a student at NBCC. Anyway, yeah, that was just one already existing issue at NBCC that our PLAR pilot kind of helped put kind of a little bit of a spotlight on.
That's a really good one, actually. And there's another one I thought of as well. I mentioned earlier, as we wanted to have a better understanding of how PLAR benefits students and what it is they're getting out of it. And, going into this, we imagined a few different benefits. One would be, if they're PLARing courses and then they're intending to take those programs afterwards, they could essentially opt out of those courses later, since they already have the credits, and thereby shortening the program. And, originally we sort of envisioned that, well, that means there's a financial savings potentially if they're taking a lower course load. We thought there's a time savings as well. For someone, let's say, who's traveling internationally, who has a family as a mid-career, that we thought could be a huge help in terms of, finding their way back into a college program if they don't have the time to take it on full time, so to speak. But there's a number of challenges that actually really kind of stand between the student and those benefits. And a large one is that their full-time status as a student is extremely meaningful, especially for an international student, in terms of their visas, their loans, and financial support. So what we kind of learned along the way, a lot of the people we worked with didn't actually want to lose their full-time status, which means that those benefits that we pictured earlier on of saving time and saving money, we had to kind of rethink what those really mean and what their impact really is on the student, because it's not as clear-cut as we might have thought going in.
Speaking about metrics, how was the project data tracked, gathered, and analyzed?
This is kind of a complex question, because I think there are a lot of different ways that we track data in all different forms. I'm going to try to answer it as best as I can, but I know Patrick has had a really good look into how we could kind of review the process at the end in summer 2022. I actually was on leave at the time because I was on maternity leave. I had my first baby, so I didn't actually get to see the end of the project. But in terms of throughout the process, there were quite a few things that we did. Up front, I think for data regarding inquiries and participants, we had those forms that Patrick mentioned earlier. We had the pre-screener, which gave us demographic info, and it gave us further information about their informal and formal education. We had the self-assessments, so that kind of gave us a snapshot of where they were in terms of skills. And then, of course, we had the formal application in the appendix, which gave us all the technical information we needed for student accounts and for Brightspace. And one kind of makeshift way that Patrick and I tracked our data in terms of communication was a really layered Excel spreadsheet. So Patrick and I, we from the beginning, we really thought the use of a CRM or a kind of customer management system, we really thought that would be helpful for us. But in terms of the pilot and when we were launching and what we had developed, it just wasn't accessible to us. So we ended up kind of keeping track of all of our communications with our inquiries, with our participants, and as we kind of reviewed earlier about the process for applicants, it's quite extensive. So we really had to keep track of where they were, what they were doing, what who emailed who what. So we really tried our best to keep a detailed description of each participant, each kind of applicant, and where they were, and what was coming up next. At the end of the process, Patrick and I had kind of visualized what we would need from our participants. And what Patrick ended up doing was issuing a participant survey. All of the participants that had submitted their learning into Brightspace received a participant survey to complete. And it was an anonymous survey where they could kind of create or fill in their own feedback about what they learned, about their PLAR experience, about how they felt about it, what they thought would be an applicable fee if we were to continue to offer this service at NBCC, all sorts of questions within that. And then also Patrick offered the opportunity to participants to do a in-person interview. And we did have one participant actually complete the interview, and they provided more detailed subjective data about their experience and what they thought of the PLAR pilot itself. Other ways that we track data, Brightspace, of course, tracks all of the submissions from our participants and their assessment and the feedback that we received from our assessors to the participants. And additionally, I've mentioned many times throughout this conversation, the student information management system. So the student account that exists within that also has information about our participants too, because they have their student number, their demographic info, the courses they completed and successfully completed, and their transcript too. I don't know, Patrick, do you have anything to add to that? Maybe some more information about the survey?
Well, I was going to jump back really quickly, actually, if I may, to Natalie asked a question about course selection.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and I actually pulled that up. So, for example, some of the data that we have.
Mm-hmm.
So I have the list in front of me. And what's kind of interesting about it is that we kept a record of how often people who are signing up for the info form selected certain courses as areas of interest. And the thing that's not surprising at all here, you might find, is that it was largely introductory courses is what people felt they wanted to try their hand at. Because of course, that's where they feel most confident about their abilities. But that includes, for example, we have a hardware components and setup course. The introduction to SQL for databases was significantly higher than the interest in intermediate SQL, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Similarly, introduction to programming was fairly high, whereas database programming, JavaScript programming came out, a good notch below that in terms of interest levels. The really advanced stuff like advanced JavaScript, for example, or object-oriented analysis, those kind of came in with the lowest level of interest, again, just because of slightly more advanced topics. And we kind of found that that was really a significant driving factor, is that people, they wanted to apply their knowledge to where they thought they would be successful. So not too surprising of an outcome there, I think.
Yeah, that makes complete sense.
Can you tell us of any student success stories that came out of this project, maybe when you were doing the surveys?
On the whole, even, I can tell you that our success rate in terms of, just comparing applications to successful applications, we had a pretty good success rate compared to, let's say even what our standard RPL office sees with equivalency applications. And the big difference there is, of course, that they don't go through that level of self-assessment and guidance that we have. So it's a very different process that they're experiencing. But what we did manage to have is where 4 people ended up actually, committing to the idea of going through with all of these demonstrations. And between them, they attempted 11 courses, and 8 of those were successful applications. Yeah, it's a pretty good ratio, we thought, especially. And 2 particular participants came out of that with the most to show for it. Both were planning to attend NBCC in the future, so they're still making plans to come to Canada. They're both international students, both from South America in this case. But one attempted for 3 courses and the other one for 4. The one who attempted the 4 courses actually came out with pretty flying colors on all of them.
Nice.
So we're really happy to be able to issue this person those credits and say that, when you're ready to come, you're going to be all set to really hit the ground running. And that particular person also, I have to say, really went above and beyond in their demonstrations. You know, they satisfied the assessor's requirements and then some. You know, they, for example, included a video introduction with every course, just giving explanations, very sort of conversational explanations of what their experience is actually like, what their background and the subject matter is, and how their career fits into all of that as well. So for an assessor, they felt like, wow, I really have a very sort of 360 view of this person that I'm assessing. So it was really exciting just to see someone, you know, taking the reins of their own success that way.
And Patrick, because it was continuous entry, could this person, after having very successfully assessed for 4 courses, could this person have reconsidered the perhaps other courses or the higher level courses in those areas?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, you know, as a pilot, we of course had a limited window to work within, so that was not an option. But in the theoretical idea is if this is the process we were able to apply long-term in a larger scale, that is absolutely the idea, is that someone would be able to apply that if they manage to, you know, be a continuous learner throughout their life, they could continue applying it for prior learning as well.
Yeah, and sometimes people underestimate themselves at the beginning, right? And then as they go through a process and they're getting some feedback that, oh yes, we really see that you have skills in these areas, then they may go back to the beginning of the process and have a little bit more confidence to say, okay, maybe I can try to apply the 200 level courses.
Absolutely. And on the other side of that coin, Natalie, we did see some of our inquiries and some of our applicants self-assess for, let's say, 6 courses, and all 6 of them, they showed promise of completing all 6 of them successfully, but they ended up deciding based on their experience in PLARing the first few courses that they didn't want to PLAR for all 6 because that was just a little too heavy. So they would go down a little bit. So I could see that as a possibility. And once they complete it, maybe they would start another course, or maybe they would just very much what you were just saying. If the pilot project didn't have such a end point in the summer of 2022, that is definitely where we could have gone with that.
So what does the future hold for this project or similar initiatives at NBCC?
Great question. That is a question that Patrick and I have been asking ourselves, and our team has been asking for a while.
Sure.
I know I had previously mentioned that our project touched a lot of other pilot projects that were ongoing at the college, and already touched possible opportunities for change at the college too. So we've been kind of running with that. We have a new strategic plan that's being developed currently. And a lot of what we learned in the PLAR pilot aligns with some of the ideas in the strategic plan. So we're hoping that our manager is really encouraging us to almost do some consultation on some of the projects that are being completed so that we can help provide feedback on what we learned, and to help make a lot of the other things that are ongoing more robust. So some of the examples, to be a little bit more specific, is we're looking at the opportunity for personal portfolios for our students at NBCC, and all different kinds of software exists for this, like to have like a portfolio of credentials and prior learning and all micro credentials and all of those things in one place. So we have been exploring options with that. We're also looking at building out our micro credentials. I know that there has been some research at our college currently about IT micro credentials. So the PLAR pilot really does fit with that. Patrick, I think, mentioned this in the last episode, but there's another project going on at NBCC called the FAST program, and they're looking to go into the IT realm as well. So Patrick and I have been participating in many meetings with the FAST program to try to help add advice or consultation and use some of the things that we've created to help support that. And then in general, we really want to expand PLAR services across programs. So we're researching and investigating other departments that maybe we could offer PLAR services to. The pilot project was in IT. So what other departments could benefit from this? Obviously, we Patrick and I believe that all departments could benefit from this, but because it was such an extensive project, we really need to take it step by step. So expanding out on services slowly is one area that we're looking into. In general, we're trying to continue to collaborate with the RPL office and admissions, provide feedback on what we learned, to what current services are being offered, what we can do to help. And then additionally, again, a theme that keeps coming up is our systems too. So Patrick and I have also been kind of putting a ringing it into people's ears about the importance of kind of making maybe some changes or some developments in that area as well at the college. I'm sure that you have other things too to add, Patrick, because there's just so many areas that we've been kind of researching and looking. I don't know if you want to talk a bit about technology too, because that's an area we've been looking into as well.
Yeah, I mean, Michelle already mentioned, the portfolio tools, for example, but we're just generally also looking at researching more technologies that can help support this process. I mean, the one thing we did learn is that, I'm sure as I was describing the process to you earlier, you might have thought it sounds like a very hands-on sort of approach, which it is. So anything we can do to sort of, ease the demands on college resources and on people, just to make it a more sustainable service as well. Those are definitely things we want to explore, and also just to enhance the ways that people can make their demonstrations. So, even sort of the sort of really next level sort of technologies like AI and VR and things like that, and how they might fit into a service like this in the future.
Yeah.
Those are really interesting things to explore that we're, at least on the peripheral, looking at now as well.
Yeah, it's on your radar at the very least.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've been doing a lot of research in terms of looking up these various tools like Patrick mentioned, but Patrick and I are also engaging in quite a bit of professional development over the next few months too, to hopefully add on to our own knowledge to be able to better the PLAR services as well.
Perfect. Well, Michelle and Patrick, it's been such a pleasure to speak to you today, and we really appreciate you taking the time to share your expertise with our listeners. On behalf of BC Prior Learning Action Network, we'd like to thank you for this opportunity to learn more about PLAR at NBCC.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak about it.
Yes, thanks for having us.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.